Hey everybody, we're going to give you a couple of minutes to come into the experience. Go ahead and hit the share button, tag a couple friends, whatever you have to do to get people in the room. I promise it's going to be worth your time. We're going to get started. We're going to give you about 1 more minute. Sorry, I'm looking at it at the same time. We're going to give you about 1 more minute to go ahead and invite your friends and share this on your timeline. Somebody said y'all on time. Woo. Look at us being Black excellence right in front of you, starting on time. Gotta do it if you let them. So we're gonna give it just a couple more minutes and then we're gonna begin. I wanna first tell you guys that I really appreciate everyone being here, you for watching, and I definitely appreciate all my friends for coming in and sitting in the square. I feel like the Brady Bunch right now. Like we should have had a really good intro or whatever and drop it in like
Black Brady Bunch.
No, what the Black Brady Bunch? We totally should have done that. I don't know why we didn't, but we totally should have. But I want you guys to meet some amazing people. Many of you know I'm the lead researcher for the State of the Black Church Study. It's coming out in next month, and we're going to have a lot of great trends on Black millennials and Generation Z. Please don't forget that when people are researching Generation Z, to a certain extent, it has to be taken with a grain of salt. To a certain extent, you can accept it because these are only adults, which means we're only looking at about 6 years of the higher end of Generation Z. So it would be from 24 to 18. Those are the only people we can really study right now, right? Legally. And so when people talk about Generation Z, we're making a whole lot of assumptions. That's why I don't make a lot of assumptions. I only stick with what I can understand and know as a practitioner or from practitioners, because as far as data goes, I mean, we can look at stuff like school scores. We can look at data that's out there. But what we can't do is the kind of research I like to do, which is quantitative and qualitative research, so that we're not just stuck to the numbers. Something just happened weird when something went on screen. So we're not just stuck to the numbers, but we can actually have conversations. And so while a lot of people are jumping ahead to this Gen Z research for the sake of selling books and PDF resources, we try to do legitimate work over here with the Black Millennial Cafe. And so even when we put out the State of the Black Church Study, I want you to know that we are honoring the fact that this is a small segment of Gen Z. We're just doing the best we can to give you what we can while we can. But we're going to talk to practitioners who actually look at your neighbor and say, amen, know what they're talking about. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to hear from some of my friends. They're going to tell you a little bit about who they are. We'll start with the class clown, Dr. Eric Gill.
You're so disrespectful, but I love you.
Wait. On the show, A Different World, when you intro yourself, you got to tell a little bit about yourself, tell who you would be on the Different World TV show and why.
Oh, that's easy. Dwayne.
You would not be. You would be Ron.
I'm the star of the show, man. It's centered around me.
Okay.
And I got my Whitley. Come on, somebody. Anyways. I am Dr. Eric Gill. I am the pastor of operations at Metropolitan Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We are gearing up to commemorate the 1921 race massacre that took place in Tulsa. So I want to put that on everybody's radar. We know all eyes are going to be on Tulsa. So pray with us, pray for us as we still navigate the systems of white supremacy from 1921 that is still present in 2021. But anyways, that's a little bit about me. I was a youth pastor for 10 years in Virginia and in Oklahoma. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, for real. Barbara.
What's up, everybody? My name is Barbara. I'm the assistant to the pastor for youth, also youth minister at Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia. I'm originally from Brooklyn and relocated out here for this work, and I'm glad to be here. The first person that came to mind was Jaleesa, interestingly enough. I feel like she always had a lot of funk. I always appreciated her multi-talentedness, so I definitely see myself in her, so I would be
Jaleesa. Okay, let's drop down to Josh. Josh, introduce yourself. First of all, I want you to know that I know when I saw it, people were like, Josh is a pastor. I know what he do for a living. He my friend. Mind your business. But I am doing this because he, along with me, is one of the OGs of millennial research. And he spent so much time doing youth and young adult ministry that it makes sense to have him, even though he's transitioned to, being a pastor. So he don't really talk to me and Eric that much. Like when we go and we see him at dinner, he makes us sit at the table next to him because he said he's a pastor and we got to sit at the kids' table at Thanksgiving. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Josh.
I don't even know what to say after that. But thank you, Dr. Bree, for the opportunity to be on here. I am Joshua Mitchell, and I currently serve as a senior pastor at 31st Street Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia. I also am a faculty member at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology here at Virginia Union University, and spent 15 years in youth ministry. My last stop was at the Willow Avenue Baptist Church in Houston, Texas. So I am excited to be here, and I'm the author of Black Millennials in the Church. Meet me where I am. Glad to be here. My character would be Dwayne. Eric is definitely Ron to my Dwayne. And if not, then I'd probably be Walter, Sinbad's character.
I forgot about Walter. Everybody want to be Dwayne. Let me say who I would be.
Come on.
I would be, the easy one is Whitley because I like stuff. But outside of that, I would totally be Kim. I mean, I would totally have been like Kim, stressed out over all of my quizzes, stressed out over getting into medical school. That I'm Kim. Okay, let's hit you, Mark.
What's going on, everyone? Dr. Bree, thank you for having us on here. My name is Reverend Mark. Also at the Alfred Street Baptist Church, serving as an assistant minister. Served and have done a lot of youth and young adult ministry in the state of Massachusetts, along with nonprofit and youth and young adult conferences for about 7 to 8 years. 7 to 8 years before transitioning to Alfred Street. I mean, everyone is calling Dwayne, but I was going to hit you up with Walter. So I really appreciate that shout out, Josh. I was going to go with Walter as well, but I have some Dwayne tendencies, I feel like, but okay. We'll go to that.
Okay. But wait, why are you Walter?
I love that personality. I every time I seen him when the credits start rolling, I love the personality.
Okay, got you. Now, speaking of class clowns in the left corner, the class clown in the right corner, Dr. Shaq.
Why you gotta flirty like that? So, but no. I am Shakima North. Everybody knows me in the world as Shaq. I currently serve as the Vice President of Youth Development, Equity, and Inclusion at Covenant House, New York, which is a organization that provides residential and support services to youth experiencing homelessness. I have served as pastor to families with children for 10 years at the Concord Baptist Church of Christ in Brooklyn. And prior to that, I was the director of youth and young adult ministries at the Elmwood United Presbyterian Church in East Orange, New Jersey. My character, I was going to say Jalissa as well. I used to be a resident advisor when I played basketball in college, but I was also a resident advisor for 2 years. And then I'm always like the dorm mother. So like the peer leader, like we can get in stuff together, but I'm also going to be the leader at the same time. You know what I'm saying?
You're like, guys, too far.
Yeah, too far. But you know, far. What's far is always debatable. But
with Shaq, what's far is debatable. Okay, trust what she is saying. So thanks so much for being here. We're gonna get into it. Don't forget to share this, like it, tag your friends, your grandmama and them, and your cousins, all of them, because we got time today. So we're going to start off with really general questions. Like, what do y'all see as the biggest difference working with millennials versus Gen Z? It's tricky for me. I'm a millennial. I've raised, many of you know, my niece and nephew are like my children. And so I have one millennial and one Gen Z. My millennial is on the, of course, the low end of millennials. He's 25. And then my girl is 23 and she's Gen Z. About Gen Z. Yeah, we got something going on with this generation. You know, if I wasn't from Dallas and Saginaw, I might even be scared of them. But you know, I'm a thug, so I ain't never scared. But I tell you what, that next generation coming up, there's some kind of generation. What do y'all see as like big differences between millennials and Gen Z generally? What y'all got? I'll tell you one, fear. They thought we were fearless. Gen Z is fearless or careless. I'm not sure that I really have my finger on it yet. I'm not sure if it's fearless or careless. What y'all got?
I read a stat that said that they spend over 3.5 hours a day on their phones are streaming videos. And so I would say that Gen Z is way more connected. Even in us as millennials, you know, we know what it's like for our parents to tell us, don't come back in until the street lights is on. And we made it work with a water hose and a stick and a rock outside. And we knew how to survive. But my godchildren, Gen Z, are glued to their phones. And so I would say that they are extremely electronically connected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, Dr. Gill. I think not only are they electronically connected, but I think interestingly enough, like their parents, a lot of millennials, their parents who are also millennials are also screen connected. And so like we have like this interesting dynamic where there's almost two generations equally as connected. They're more connected than us. They have more screen time than us. But they also have that different dynamic where we came in and we had to learn a lot of these new nuances with different technology that our parents didn't really understand. And so like we see that dynamic now playing out with some of our seasoned saints not being tech savvy, and we have to kind of backtrack and back teach. But in this type of dynamic, we're seeing that there's a Gen Z growing up also social media savvy, technologically savvy, and so are we.
Yeah, that is different. And the last time we saw this was when we went from Generation X, who's right above us, and they were also giving birth to us. And we actually got to see that there was very little difference between the generations. So depending on whether you were raised by boomers or Generation X, you got to see that, like, if you had a Generation X parent, like you probably saw that parent like getting ready to go out like to party. You know what I mean? Like y'all were almost doing the same kinds of things, right, you know, at the same time. And so we've been able to see that in experience and circumstance and environment, right? In societal spaces, like parents and children being in the same place, like in society, like maybe I was at the same bar once you got of age because there was such a little age gap. Now we're being able to see it digitally, which is gonna make a big difference. I'm wondering if it protects children in ways it did not protect us too. Because if you remember when AOL and such came out, they had all them PBS specials and all the Monday night specials about kids who thought they were talking to somebody their age, and it was like a grown burly man like, I'm Roger. You know what I mean? Like, and they would go out on this like think they're gonna be playing. But we don't see many of those now. And I think a lot of it is because the parents of the generation is very connected, actually knows how to put some systems into place. But I cannot edit anything on TikTok for the life of me. So there is also a little bit of a difference because it's hard. And they just shoot out TikToks like nothing. And like my child is really good with social media, right? He would grow his Twitter followers to tens of thousands and then drop it just to delete the account and start all over just to show he could do it all over again. Wow. I asked him to work my social media. He's like, I don't really like social media like that. Huh? And I want to pay you. And you said no. Like, yeah, that's not really my thing to do it like that. I want to do it for myself. God bless you, man of God. Don't ask me for no more money. What you got? I saw you unmute your mic earlier, Shaq.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I think that the difference also is that millennials and Gen Z show up in the world differently, right? And they have different expectations of spaces, right? And so millennials are more, it's about how you make me feel, right? Mm-hmm. And Gen Z is about, how is this going to help me? Like, what is this going to do for me right now? And so when you mentioned earlier that you don't know if Gen Z is more fearless or reckless, it might be a combination of both, because there is this need for results, right?
Mhm.
Whereas millennials, they may say, well, it makes me feel a certain kind of way. It doesn't
Mhm.
make me feel a kind of way. I'm going to step in or I'm going to step back. I'm just going, you know, be in this space, right?
Mhm.
Create space. Whereas Gen Z is like, nah, we about to take this. Like,
Yeah.
y'all ain't giving it to me fast enough. Y'all not listening to what I need. And
Mhm.
so I'm about to go out here and take it. So
Yeah.
it might be a combination of fearless and assertiveness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought we were assertive, but let me tell you where I see like Gen Z, I feel like they, and I hate to use this word now, but like trump us in their demands for respect and to be valued. Like I thought we demanded it, but you can really see it when it comes to sexuality and gender.
Yeah.
Like they do not play any games with you, and you better get it right. Like you don't have any space to error, which I think you need space to error, but they ain't really checking for space to error. Josh, I saw you unmute your. Oh, you had something to say, Shaq?
I was just gonna say, but they're also the most diverse and inclusive generation, right? So
guess what, Shaq? We're gonna see that they're not really moving as progressively as we believe they would.
Really?
Yeah. So we get to see the ones who are loud and in our space are actually progressive, right? And really like leading the way and are trailblazers. But we have a really strong population. And actually got this from other research done. Well, I can't say it yet until it's published. But we actually get to see that. I mean, think about it. Let me just say this. If you look, we've had blackface in middle school and high school from these kids. They ain't progressed. And they know how to take racism to a different level via TikTok, just like the progressive Gen Z knew how to embarrass Trump on TikTok by telling everybody to buy up all the tickets or get all the tickets and leave him in an empty room. We also see that they're doing that on the other end too. Now, I will say more is probably still true.
Yeah.
But at the numbers we expect to see them based on what we get to see from some really bold, courageous Gen Z, we're not really seeing it as much.
I wonder how much of that, though, is also connected to church-connected Gen Zers and non-church connected Gen Zers. Right?
Yeah. Now, that would be good because you know what I'm wondering? The church connected, if they were around in this last administration, they may have picked up racism, holy racism, Christian racism, in ways that are much more eloquent and sophisticated, right? Then hey, Marty, I told you to leave the niggers alone. I mean, we expect to see that version, but we get to see the nuanced, sophisticated version maybe coming out of churches. Pastor Josh, I heard you. I mean, I saw you unmute.
No, it was getting good, so I didn't want to break this up. I think for me, one of the main differences that I'm seeing is the way that we think about authority, right? And so, whereas I think millennials, we were still searching. We were that Y generation. We were searching for help to understand our identity and all these kind of things. But I see what Gen Z is, they are the authority. And they're not looking for somebody to help me define it. I'm going to tell you who I am. And that's my pronoun from top to bottom. I show up as the authority on who I am. And I'm really teaching you how to engage me. So they are the authorities in their lives. And even the authority for, I would say for education is different. YouTube is as valuable as Howard University, or as valuable as your local, whoever it was, your guitar teacher that you had, your Christian academy that would teach you this, and that. I don't need that. I can get this right from YouTube, and I can do it. Like I learned how to do it. So I think they have sort of blown up this idea of authority in a way that I think is different from us. I think that as a millennial, we were still in search of an authority to help us.
Right.
That's true.
To understand who we were. They are telling us. And so there's this, from the educational side, for me, there's this amateurism that is become the standard.
Yes.
And so that's the difference for me.
That's why everybody got entrepreneur strategist in their bio. You know, it's kind of like if I've watched it for, done 2 times, I'm the expert now. I also know you said they were the authority for their life. Yeah, they kind of walk into every space as the authority. And as much as I can appreciate the courage, right, and the confidence, it is dangerous. I've also noticed, and I try to be careful because, I was very protective of our generation. So I try to be just as protective of theirs. But I've also known their critical thinking in society. Como se dice, common sense and nice, is a little different than ours. The decisions we can make on the spot sometimes, they seem to be lacking in some areas, but very strong in others. Like their survival instinct is still strong, but their critical thinking to stop and think things through, especially because they're not looking for authority and they're not always looking for help, can kind of be a little odd. It's odd. Like I know, Shaq, you've seen survival skills like to the max, right?
Yeah, and I was gonna say that the critical thinking that you're speaking of could be off because of the level of trauma that they've experienced, right? And so my work is really in like strength-based youth development, trauma-informed care, right? And so when you are a trauma-organized individual and always in the moment of crisis, you can't think clearly, right? Yeah. And so the only thing that I can manage to do in the moment is survive, right? And Reverend Joshua, it's interesting that you say like they're telling us, right? One of the tenets of positive youth development and trauma-informed care is that youth are the experts in their own lives. And it's interesting because whenever I say that in the church setting, oh my God, the amount of pushback that I get really from these youth leaders, right, that I'm training, when I just make that phrase, right, when we talk about strength-based youth development, we have to understand youth as the experts in their own lives. They know their experience better than we know their experience.
Yeah.
We may have had similar experiences, but we also may have had different tools and resources, right, to help us get through those experiences. So I mean, that it's tough, but I think trauma is one of the biggest factors. There's a statistic that says that 26% of kids will experience or witness a traumatic event by the time they turn 4 years old, right? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about Gen Z, like
Shaq, what 4-year-olds experiencing out here? Like
witness or experience, right?
What are they witnessing or experiencing under 4?
4-year-olds who have been abused by their parents.
Yeah.
Right. So we talk
about
what
was the percentage? Did you give me a percentage?
26%.
That is so high. I mean,
26%.
a quarter of the generation has experienced trauma by 4?
By 4 years old.
Or witness
or experience by 4 years old, right? So when we talk about kids being not being able to critically think, you can't do that when your mind is always in crisis mode.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually very. Yeah, that's a little depressing in a good way. I'm glad to know it, but it is. So I've always said we should watch how we talk to young people, because saying things like, "Oh, that's just puppy love." No, it's not. I know somebody who went to stay with their boyfriend at about 13. That's not puppy love. As a matter of fact, it could be sex work after a while, because she said, whatever he wants, I have to do. This is where I have to live and sleep. That ain't puppy love. I still ain't had no experience like that at my age. Yep. So to call this like an elementary version of, well, I won't say love, but you know what I'm saying? A dating experience is just, we really can't minimize their experiences.
Yeah. And I wouldn't even necessarily call it sex work. I would call it survival sex, right? Especially because, like you said, it's where they living, right? So it's either I sleep on a park bench, I sleep in the subway, right? And this right here is like my context, because I'm in the shelters, right? And it's also in the church too, because a lot of the kids, and this is what my doctoral project was about, because a lot of the kids that I was servicing at the church were sleeping at the homeless shelter. And I didn't realize that until I started working at the shelter.
With their family, Shaq?
No, by themselves. I work at a youth shelter, not a family shelter. So When I started working at the shelter, I would see kids in the shelter who were in my youth ministry program at the church. And I had no idea that when we said, everybody leave, go home, that they didn't have a home and that they were either in the subway or traveling downtown to get to the shelter, right? So part of it, when we talking about sex work, is it's about survival. I don't have any place to live, so I have to do this so that I can keep a roof over my head.
And it didn't start like that normally, you know,
Right.
but you know, the things that people do when they realize you don't have anything or anybody else, you know, changes. And we all know these experiences. Tell me this, how are we engaging Generation Z differently in youth ministry? And I asked that question because, you know, in this world, we think you do the same thing for all youth, that give them pizza, let them, you know, recite some Bible verses, and they gonna love it. You know, it's gonna be lit. And I tell people all the time, I tell my clients, don't call nothing lit. You ain't got lit capabilities. If you ain't got, if your music don't have cussing, you ain't got no alcohol, you ain't got lit. That's for lit. Okay, you gonna have fun. That's not lit. So how are we engaging Gen Z, or how do you think people should engage Gen Z ministry differently because of the demographic makeup of this generation?
I think what I celebrate about this generation is that they've moved from kind of a consumer mindset, and they're definitely in a creator's space, right? Mm-hmm. When we look at TikTok is the prime example of what it means to be able to dream something, to think of something, to put it together, to put it out there, and believe in it enough to put it out there. Mm-hmm. And I think the church space, specifically youth ministry, should look like that. It should look like an opportunity for them to create, for them to imagine, for them to see themselves in line with, you know, what their imago Dei inside of them as creators. So I have found in my experience with our youth ministry that our young people want to ask questions, not just to hear the answers. They want to be able to be in different case studies and imagine a scenario in which they would come up with their own solutions to it. For our teen ministry, we do something once a month called Do Good Sunday. And that started before I got there. And I'm really grateful because every month they get to decide how they want to give back to the community. It's not something that's dictated to them. So I think Gen Z really thrives in spaces where they're asked, what do you want to do? And what do you see? And how can we hone your own skills? And you tell us what those skills are. We're not going to tell it to you. So I think that those are a few things that I think youth ministry does or should do better. That's better than, you know, pizza time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's actually the John 5 method. You know, do you want to be made well? You know what I mean? Like, I give you agency. I know what I see. I know what I think I can do for you, but what do you want from me? And I think that's how I appreciate that. I think we should definitely engage all people, definitely young people. Like, how do you want me to operate in your life?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think even going off of that, I've always understood youth ministry is that it's not youth ministry unless the youth are doing the ministry. And I think a lot of the times, like we have youth catered services where we're talking to youth, we're telling youth what to do. But the difference in it, even I hear with Reverend Barbara, is like this idea of allowing them to be the creators of their curriculum, allowing them to be the creators of what they want to do, is that they're heading the ministry. And I think if we gave youth more space to head their ministry, they wouldn't be as interested as seeing as many youth involved in quote unquote big church, because they have agency over their own ministry. But the problem is everywhere they look, they're being told this is what they have to do. They don't necessarily have any ownership over any other thing. And everywhere they look, they have ownership over their own social media. They have ownership of their own TikTok, and they're creating and they're doing these things. And it's only when they come to the church, that's where they lack a level of ownership. And when there is a level of ownership, there's no investment in it. And so there's a level of allowing youth to do what they want to do. And to, you know, obviously we have our youth leaders there for a reason, but giving them a space of ownership to create their own curriculum.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback on both those comments and assertions about the Gen Z exploring their own questions. And, you know, I say this with all adoration, like I love how Pastor Howard John Wesley puts things in conversation with it. I don't negate something else. And when we talk with Gen Z and the amount of screen time they use, and we talked about them being on YouTube and YouTube moving towards being used more than Google as far as a search engine goes. One of the things that I've been able to do is to have conversations with our young people with YouTube, like so the little Nas X video, right? So we have an entire conversation on FaceTime and with our young people, and it's not that I'm telling them, you know, that he's wrong, that he's going to hell. No, they're already there. Like they have already watched, you know, the Illuminati video that's associated. That's an explanation of why his hands are the way they are. They didn't watch the breakdown of, you know, all that kind of stuff. They've already done that. So are you just telling them no? And you can't tell creative generations no, right? If you ain't gonna tell me, I'm gonna go find it somewhere. Right. And so you put it in conversation with other people to allow them to come to their own ideological stances when it comes to certain areas at a younger stage than what we did. Right. So we having this conversation with 13 and 14 year olds.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think that's the difference between the transactional and the relational youth ministry. Right. Because for so long, our idea of youth ministry has been transactional. Now, relational is when you're in conversation with youth. One of the things that I used to do was when I was at the ministry at the church is at the beginning of every ministry season. So we would align with the school year, right? So we would go from September to the end of June. We would take August, July and August off, right? And so at the beginning of every ministry season, when I spoke with the youth, I didn't even take those 2 months to plan out what I was going to do, right? I had my goal was to have a conversation with them. And the 2 questions that I asked them to start off that ministry season was, what did you go through this summer during our 2 months off that had we talked about it, you would have been able to handle better, right? So they would tell me, I went through this. And so if you had have talked about X, Y, Z, I probably would have known how to engage this situation a little bit better. So that's my first question. The second question is—
wait, pause real quick, Shaq. Most people can't even take that to even ask it. Like, this is what you missed. So I just want to pause right there so people can think for a second. Honestly, that this is a great question to ask, but your ego has to be able to take it.
Yeah. You know? Absolutely. Because my goal is not to be that pastor that I find success in just that you can quote Bible verses. My success, to me, success looks like you being able to navigate the world when I'm not there.
Yeah.
Right. Making the decisions or telling you what to do. But that was my first. My second question was, what else do you need me to talk about this year? So, okay, what did I miss? But then what else do you need me to talk about this year? And that's how I would develop the discussions that we would have week to week. And how that was developed was diverse. We use video, and there's not a lot of curriculum out there. You all know that is for us, right? And so we have to, create our own curriculum. But that's how I went about just designing or choosing what we would talk about. And when I tell you, I would have topics ranging from, like stuff that I probably had to go research. But we're talking about eschatology. We're talking about Dante's Inferno, like all kinds of stuff. And so I'm like, all right, this is what y'all want to talk about. This is what we're going to talk about. No matter how, if it stretched me, right? In terms of what they were talking about. But that's how we did it. And
now I have a question.
I had to hold my agenda loosely. And that's the other thing, right? Like, it's not about me, right? It's about them and their growth and development.
Good.
I have a question for you. Because I have always talked trash about ministries who did exactly what you said, but I respect you enough to try to understand it. So when ministry shut down in the summer, I'm like, what? Especially, well, and some of it depends on maybe the socioeconomic status, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like when churches in the hood shut down in the summer, I'm like, kids need you then. They're hungry, they're homeless-ish, you know what I mean? Like so much stuff is going on. Like I feel like I would rather you shut down in the school during the school year than shut down in the summer. Help me understand that mindset.
So we had other options available.
Okay.
So not everything shut down. So I taught a program, not taught, but led a program called Teen Talk, which happened every Wednesday, from like 6 to 9. We would do check-in, homework help, an hour of discussion, and then an hour of dinner and recreation every Wednesday. So that program took a break, but we also had in the summertime like Freedom School, which was which you all know what Freedom School is. And then there are also like Friday night programs that we would do, and also some of the traditional church ministries, right?
Like Vacation Bible School, because let me tell you,
Vacation Bible
School, love Vacation
like
Bible
Concord,
School.
Vacation Bible School and Freedom School was together, just the age ranges were a little bit different.
I like doing it separate because them nachos be real good and that's spaghetti beyond.
You're crazy. You're crazy.
With you.
Spaghetti be on.
Okay, let me tell y'all. I'll be like, about to get this food, about to get this Vacation Bible Study food. Like I loved it. Y'all understand? Like they did such a good job cooking at my home church, Antioch. Like shout out to the kitchen ministry. Y'all was doing a great job. Like
the other thing I think though with that too is so every youth ministry is different, and it has to be based on your context and your demographic, right? So in Brooklyn, kids are not coming to the church in the summertime. They're in the park playing ball. They are, they're going to the other community centers that are open in the summer. They might be traveling depending on the family situation, that kind of thing. So for us, that kind of situation worked. Now there might be some churches where that won't work, but for us that worked.
Yeah, I've seen it not work in some churches. They're like, well, the teachers need a break. I'm like, well, why are you only, recruiting teachers for youth ministry? Because I know teachers who don't like kids. That's another thing, real quick. Stop asking people to do on their own time or, to volunteer in the church what they do for a living. Everybody don't like what they do for a living. You know what I'm saying? You know how many bus drivers be like, sit down. You know what I mean? They shouldn't be around anybody's kids, like ever. And we want them to drive the bus at church. Now you got the kids at church miserable. You already made the kids at school miserable.
Here's the thing about that break, though, even if it's not a teacher, because I'm not a school teacher, but we rarely have enough help in youth ministry, and so we're always exhausting and we're experiencing burnout. But we actually do need a break. But we just have to figure out how to have that break and still have the kids have what they need at the same time.
Right. So when I did Black Millennial Cafe research on Black millennials and faith, one area that we saw that millennials did not want to work in was youth ministry.
Yes.
Like that was
different for us because we helped with the younger kids, and the millennials now ain't helping with the younger kids.
Millennials were like, you can see the further they went down the like age, range, the more they didn't want to help. But guess what? Many of them felt like helping with youth would make them childish. Like that means the adults would continue to treat them like children. And so they wanted to disconnect and put some distance between it so they could be seen as adults. And so I think that's something that we have to remember, that you can't ask people to have adult responsibilities and then also try to treat them like children or like they don't really have any agency, no authority. They're just sitting there like you go in front of them because you look like them, kind of thing. But you said some, Shaq, and then that makes me raise another question. So when we were talking about who we were going to invite, to be clear, just so we don't have no drama, nobody on here was second string. Okay, what nobody asked because somebody else said no. So I don't want no drama because I'm about their life. So when we were talking about who to have, we intentionally wanted to have a split group, right? We were gonna have one more person on, so we could have 3 women, 3 men. And it became very difficult to find the third woman. Now, I know people are gonna be in my inbox. You could have called this for, okay, calm down. I'm just talking about when I look at people who have diverse backgrounds, who are extremely experienced, who are great practitioners, love for people, okay, because it's more than just, you having a position, love people. And then I don't know everybody, and I'm really okay with saying I don't know everybody. I'm sure they're amazing people I should have invited, and I'm wrong, and I'll make up for it one day, okay? But I said, nope, leave it just like that, because I think this is true for youth ministry. For children's ministry, people pick women often. Right. When it comes to youth ministry, they normally choose men, and they choose men who want to pastor. So it's a stepping stone for a man, which is why women aren't youth pastors as much. But children, when it comes to babies, you'll find, and I don't know the real data, but probably 80% are women.
Yeah. And if we're honest, Dr. Bree, if we're honest, those youth ministries are often ineffective because the minister who's there is preaching to young people as if they're preaching to adults, and they're missing the entire relationality of what it takes to connect with people.
Absolutely.
And what it takes to build a youth ministry. I can't ask you what I missed if my eyes are on what's next for me and not what's next for you. Like,
every once in a while, this is how Eric shows up. But that's the truth. But that can explain. Both of y'all are so correct. Why people are not as invested to even try to figure it out. Because in their mind, like I'll never forget, and you remember this, Josh. Everybody, when I was going to Wheeler to preach youth revival.
It's a great revival, by the way.
You did a great job, by the way. I remember everybody called me like, Doc, you preach to the house, don't forget about them youth. And I was like, well, youth are going to be there. I don't care. Preach to cause. You trying to get your next engagement. And I was like, no, I cannot let these young people leave out here with no word. I'm trying to get the next thing. Like, I think, and hear this, people of God, who are trying to get their next engagement, but you keep getting invited to youth stuff and you just try to practice for the next stage. Ain't no next stage. The stage you have in that moment is your stage. And there's something about being faithful to your assignment that will allow you to get the opportunity to do something else. We have to stop practicing for Hampton at a youth retreat.
Come on.
What you say?
Come on.
But I also think, and I might get in trouble for this, but that's okay. I also think senior pastors need to stop putting youth in the care of people who just express the call to ministry, right?
Right.
Because you're least.
I thought you were going to say something else. Wait a minute.
You're least experienced. You're least trained. No seminary education, nothing. Person in the hands of one of the most vulnerable populations in your congregation.
Right.
So
wait a minute. I
didn't have that mindset.
Wait, pause. I knew Jack or Eric was gonna get me in trouble today. I knew it for sure. I'm gonna tell you right now. I knew it. That's why they hear kind of too. But I knew it.
But we always tell on ourselves though.
Say that again.
I said we always tell on ourselves.
To
Dr. Shack's point, right? That we don't care or value them, right?
Right.
So by who we put in front of them, by these minuscule budgets,
baby,
for our ministry, for our young people,
$3,500 for the year.
Come on now, that's if you got that.
So,
and I'm gonna be quiet before I get in trouble. We always telling ourselves. Go ahead, Dr. Gill. Go ahead.
I'm just thinking about, like, we talk about what Dr. Shack is saying, like, and the woman being in a role, and like, make sure I choose my words correctly. But for I go to a Black woman as my primary care physician, not a white man, not a Black man. I go to a Black woman because the Black woman, she gonna take time to make sure all of me is good. Mm-hmm. Rather than like the fly-by-night experiences that I've had with men. They're going to be way more detail oriented. They're going to be way more in tune to my mental, my spiritual, as well as my physical. When you think about that in the terms of the Black church, then maybe we should deconstruct these prehistoric and ignominious notions about women in ministry, and instead of treating
what did you say?
Ignominious.
Go ahead.
Right? But you have a woman in that role, and it's okay to have a woman in that role because a woman is going to make sure that the mind, body, and soul of that is going to nurture to the detail, to the most, to the very molecule of that young person, and that's going to make them better, rather than somebody looking for their next gig or next preaching gig.
I also say that in that way, though, too. You said nurture to talk about like being detail oriented, not to talk about holding them in our bosom. I really appreciate that. And I see everybody, by the way, I promise you, these are people I love and my friends. I do want you to acknowledge their titles, even if I forget sometimes. So I appreciate y'all doing it in the chat and the work they've done and the stages they've made. Okay. The progressions. Okay. I think it was Reverend Barbara.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think the reflection of the hierarchy in youth ministry is definitely a reflection of the dynamic of how it is in big church, right? So we have a flood of women volunteers, and Pastor Howard John Wesley almost every other week has to be on the pulpit begging the men to come join us. I'm grateful we do have a good amount of young men joining us in the ministry, but the reality is that we are reflecting what we're doing in quote unquote big church, right? Yeah. So it's hard to avoid that reality when we're not trying to deal with the symptoms, with the actual problem. We're just looking at the symptoms and seeing what will eventually be perpetuated with these young people if they stay in the church. I think with all the statistics that we've seen, like a lot of them are choosing to now create their own spaces outside of the church to get the same fellowship experience without the connection to the idea of the body of Christ or the reality of the body of Christ. So we're all connected in our issues and our solutions. And if we're not intentional about focusing on them on both ends, I think we're definitely going to continue to perpetuate same problems.
Yeah. Can I also say this? And because this is one thing when y'all mentioned the whole thing about inexperienced people working with you, that just that is a trigger for me.
Yeah, we probably need to stay there just for a second so that people understand how important it is to have people who know what they're doing and not people who are practicing.
Yeah.
Like, they just learned how to walk and chew gum, and now you're going to add in a whole youth ministry.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that people would benefit from being clear about is that a call to youth ministry is a legitimate call.
Right.
Thank you.
And so, and that can be a person's life work. Yeah. And that does not make them not a pastor, right? Because people come to me and they say, well, when you going to pastor? And
when you going to grow up? That's
I'm already pastoring. I've been pastoring for 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not a senior pastor of a church because that's not my call.
Yeah.
My call is to pastor young people, whether it be in traditional church or church adjacent spaces.
Yeah.
Because I'm at the shelter, I'm still a pastor to those young people who in many instances are church connected, but they've been disconnected from their faith communities for a number of reasons.
This is a good comment over here. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Jack. This is a good comment over here. Somebody said you won't have someone practicing in music ministry.
No, sometimes we do.
but no.
But
you never hire someone to practice when you have the choice.
When you have choice.
You have legitimate choices. You know what I'm saying? Like, and you have the money.
Hallelujah.
We still allow people.
It's not just a plug. Like somebody plugging in there to silence some parents.
Yeah.
And to piggyback off Dr. Shack, for me, it has always been, I've always made the argument that youth pastoring is harder.
It is.
You have to go another step that the senior pastor maybe doesn't have to go in teaching, and pastoral care. Like it's one thing to do a 10-minute hospital visit. It's another thing to show up to the shelter, to show up to every cantata, every quinceañera, court. Come on now. It is a different level of, you got to know what you're talking about when you're a youth pastor. You can't show up and talk about this particular text and not, whereas I think a senior pastor may have the benefit of folks just assuming that they know what they're talking about and accepting what is given. A kid is they're gonna bounce back. They're gonna want to have questions about this. And so you can show up unprepared if you want to as a youth pastor. You won't fare very well. And so to your point, even about the revival, and I want to give Dr. Cosby some public credit here. It was so hard to pick who would come while I was the youth pastor at Wheeler for those 5-6 years, because we knew a million, preachers who would come and, dump the house, Doc, and would probably do it hoping that it would give them the opportunity to go to big church on Sunday. But it was always who is going to minister, who is going to talk to our young people, who's going to minister to our young people. And so there were people who were left out who I'm great friends with, who I love, who I would bring as a senior pastor that were never going to get a chance to come to Wheeler, because we honored, specifically in that summertime, that was a big season for us, and that youth revival was big for us. We wanted to honor our young people, and we wanted to make sure that who we put before them would actually do the assignment. I remember telling Dr. Gill when he came, I want you to do the assignment. I want you to talk to our young people, and the rest will take care of itself. So I've always thought it was harder to do this work.
Yeah, I also want to give Dr. Cosby credit that when it was over, he was uber appreciative.
Oh yeah.
Of the ministry to the youth, and he made it very clear. And people were like, that's good. He made it very clear that he appreciated you doing your assignment, and that felt just as good as, you know what I mean? And I mean for him, that it was just as much of a home run to do the assignment that was specific to the youth that it would be on a Sunday morning. Like, it was the same kind of praise. And for a young preacher, because it was 10 years ago, at least, probably somewhere around there.
It was a while ago, yeah.
Not 10.
It wasn't 10 full, but it's
but it was close. As a young preacher, you do need that response at some point so that you continue to speak to the task at hand, because you also know when somebody's disappointed because you did the task at hand as well. So that is a pastoral responsibility.
Let me also say quickly, I don't want to dominate this part of the conversation, but let me also talk about the fact that when we talk about like who we put before our kids, my interview to be the youth pastor was as strenuous as some of my senior pastor interviews. It was 3 rounds. I had to preach, teach the young people. I had to sit with the senior staff. I had to sit with the senior pastor. There was a vote from the kids. There was a vote from, so it was not, his desire was not to throw somebody up there.
Y'all was raising some little mean Baptist adults. Let's vote on
make sure it was the right person. He used to say, we wanted to make sure it was the right person. So that position stayed vacant for 2 years because they wanted to make sure it was the right person for our young people. And going back to something we said before, even in my pick, I think that part of me being picked as a male was representation mattered at that time for us, for our young men. So at that time, their former youth pastor was a woman, and she did a phenomenal job. Dr. Regina, I love her. They were hoping to present somebody, I think, who showed our young men something different, who was married, who was a family kind of person, because there were so many of our young men who were going through the program that didn't see that. They didn't have a positive male role model. And I think that they were so intentional in their process. And part of what made me an attractive person at that time was the hope that we could show them something different that many of our young men had not seen. And that was another positive male role model that was committed to them in that space. So I want to affirm that, and also just talk about how strenuous that was and how important those steps in the process were to finding the right person for your youth ministry.
And how you made them practice being mean Baptist adults with this vote.
Right,
We'll vote you out. You know, that's how Baptists talk. We'll vote you out.
Right.
But as we talk about the differences, there's some similarities between Gen Y, the millennials, and Gen Z, and I think it was lifted up with Dr. Mitchell in that this relational based ministry, right? If I'm showing up to the court, if I'm showing up to the basketball games, if I'm showing up to the graduation parties and all this kind of stuff like that, that's going to open them up to talk to you more. And they have unique hours of operations. So that means at times you're on the phone at 11, 12, 1 o'clock talking about a Lil Nas X video, right? And that's the extra step in ministry. Like, you build relationships so that you can do ministry. It doesn't just happen because you're in that position, you're given that title.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the senior pastor role, I'm just given the title and respect is bestowed upon me. It's a relationship that has to be grown before you can start doing ministry with both millennial and Gen Z.
Yeah, I have a question about that because I want to know why I don't have a bedtime, number one. And speaking of bedtimes that they do not have, let's talk about the parents of Gen Z, children, because I saw a message on social media and they were talking about, well, let's talk about this. Speaking of inexperienced youth pastors, this message was like a back and forth. I think it's supposed to be with the teacher, right? And I've seen it happen with youth pastors, like some of the crazy things they say to people and imagine that it's okay because they have authority as a youth pastor. And I've also seen these parents who are, hover parents, and the child never does anything wrong, but they really don't even know their child because they're not around enough to know their children's habits. They don't have the same kind of structure, and you really don't see them sometimes until it's time to complain. I've engaged that type. I'm sure there are more Gen Z type parents of Gen Z that I do want to discuss, but I do know this parent full of this generation full of hovering parents sometimes takes the fun out of what you're doing. And I remember seeing it about, I don't even want to say how long ago because it tells too much about my age, but I remember seeing it maybe 2 decades ago. And it was a smaller percentage. I remember when I talked about valuing bodies as young people, more than just sex. And I had, she would be a younger millennial. Her mother came up to me and said, "Don't you tell ABC nothing about valuing her body. We got generational curses in our family. And I know what's going to happen to her. And I don't need you to interrupt that." And I was like, wow. And it was about more than just sex. And she was like, "Do not tell this person to value her body." I mean, I almost want to call CPS on her. It was just like, what is going to happen to your child that you're okay with?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I'm going to defer to my colleagues on that question because parent involvement has never really been my reality in terms of youth ministry.
Even at church?
Even in church. My last ministry context, the only parents that were involved were parents who were connected to the church, but the majority of my young people, their parents were not connected to the church. So, and most of those young people were what I consider to be loosely parented. They were either latchkey, raised themselves. Their parents were. This is a community district where the median income was, I think, about $15,000 a year, right? So these are folks living in poverty. They're working, and some of them just wasn't checking for their kids like that. And I remember making like various efforts, like whenever kids would come, I realized early on that I was working with these people's kids and they did not know who I was. And so we would do info sheets when they first started coming to the program. And then I would call the parent. So I remember one time calling this parents like, "Hey, I'm Reverend Shakima North, and I just wanted to know that your child," and they would be down the street, you know, because the project was down the street. They'd be at the church 2 days a week for like 3 hours each time, right? And nobody came and said, "Where's my kid?" Whatever. So I remember calling, and I'm like, "Yeah, such and such. Just want you to know who I am. Such and such comes to church." And the mother was like, "Oh, he go to church?" I kid you not. And I'm on the phone like, "Yeah, he comes to church a lot." or we like said, "Okay, let's do something else to try to get to meet these parents." Call everybody like, "Listen, we're giving you free dinner." We call the spaghetti dinner. We have a deacon at the church. She makes the best spaghetti in all of Brooklyn. We want to invite you. Come to spaghetti dinner. One parent came. One. So that has not been my truth. Definitely not in the shelter, and not in the church as well. Now, my first ministry context, it was about half, but the last one, I knew
Reverend Barbara.
4 or 5 parents.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm sorry, Reverend Barbara. You work in a kind of different context from what I understand.
Yeah.
Because some socioeconomic differences. Does that change?
Yes, I would absolutely say that changes. I think we have a pretty big swath in terms of our demographics socioeconomically with our young people. So we would have the young people who are, you know, who are foster kids and their parents are, you know, just barely allowing them to show up. And then we have kids who are in Jack and Jill and their parents are reading every single teen ministry bulletin and they're following up with every single scholarship opportunity that's being offered, right? So we get to see the gamut. I think really, if we're looking kind of at the median of what we're dealing with, I think parents are kind of dealing with what kids are dealing with like an overstimulation of opportunities and things to do. So our kids, more than my generation, I feel like we did 2 or 3 activities in school. We were good. We didn't even need to be leaders, all of them, like just show up, try your best, right? I think what excelling looks like for this generation, Generation Z, is being in, being a mathlete and going and taking 4 other languages and making sure you're earning an associate's degree while you're earning your high school degree, right? So our kids are doing so much. Our parents are also alongside them juggling all of that. So when we have conversations with our parents, particularly with the ones who are more middle class up and upper class, they're also in that space of trying to figure out what are all the other things my kids are doing as well. So I think parent engagement requires a lot of grace in my position. And also I feel like I think about It's a Different World as your title and how much I love The Different World, but how it's equivalent, I guess it's closest equivalent. I was talking to my fiance about this the other day. Its closest equivalent would be.
Who is that, Reverend Barbara?
No.
Mark. We were talking about the show Grownish and how like would that be the closest equivalent to A Different World? And would I have been comfortable with my kid watching Grownish, right? No. I'm uncomfortable watching Grownish and I still watch it, right?
I didn't get through the season. I was like, what? What's going over there in holiness?
Right. But it's the same concept, right? You're following these young people through college, living their lives, growing up, how it's a different world, right? So the level of exposure our young people are getting in the Generation Z, right, it's so much. And I can see our parents leaning towards being hovering parents for that reason. Like the exposure to pornography for our generation, it was like you had to have someone's DVD or someone's magazine, right?
I remember this guy had tons of tapes. I was like, why?
That's so true.
Right.
Wait, you said you had tons. Say that again.
I remember going over this guy's house. My dad and my cousin, they were going to like fix his fence, and he had like a stack of like tape, like all these VHS, right? And I was like, trying to look through them so I could watch a movie because they were like, oh, just go in the house. And I was like, ain't none of these got, like real labels on them. Like,
that's right. And there was basically, it was you didn't have as much access to it unless somebody tried to expose you to it, and so on and so forth. But for the most part, parents would know, like, okay, my child is watching or seeing something that they shouldn't be seeing. But with the level of access to technology, it's like it's so much harder for our parents to be able to curtail that, even with the blockers they can put on their phones and so on and so forth. So I think I have a lot more grace for our parents than I think I would have first coming into youth ministry.
I appreciate that. My friend was at the gas station the other day, and there was a video on in the car.
Wait, what?
Wow.
Say that again?
My friend was at the gas station.
Mm-hmm.
And he parked behind a car, and the car was watching pornography. Like, they watching pornography in the car, like on the screen. Like, how you watch your kids watch videos?
Yeah.
Like the kids watch Coco Melon. They were on
Yeah.
God almighty.
Yeah.
It was a different kind of melons.
Jack.
I forgot where I was. Sorry.
But it's wild. But I have a question when it comes to like grownish, and I need you guys to answer this in the chat, and then we can move on. And I do appreciate you calling us to have a different type of grace and understanding, you know what I mean, as far as parents. And if you guys have any questions, please answer them, because we're going to wrap up, by the way. But I want to pose a question to the audience, especially for older people who are watching. Was Different World as jarring as grownish is? Like, were you like, oh my gosh, are people really doing that? Or was it just kind of like normal stuff? Or was it a little, is salacious the word? Was it really exposing experiences of a generation that you weren't familiar with? Because when I watched grownish, I tried to watch it this season. I was like, like it was a lot. I didn't finish it this season. So, oh no, somebody said no. Okay, I didn't think it was. I didn't think they were exposing like the tricks of the trade for youth. I thought it was pretty much like a family show. Grownish is not a family show.
I haven't watched it.
It was fairly normal to me.
Yeah, I haven't really watched Grownish, but I remember
that's true,
watching. Yeah, I haven't really watched Grownish, but I remember watching Different World, and it was inspiration really to go to college, and particularly a Black college, because I wanted to
read Joseph's post.
Do some of those, have some of those Black college experiences, but I didn't. As a younger person watching it, it didn't raise flags in that way.
Yeah,
but I also wonder though, if grownish is speaking to a demographic of people in the way they would experience this world today. So are they so overly overt about what they're talking about, because that's what young folk are exposed to today? So we kind of during our adolescence and growing up of a different world, we weren't necessarily exposed to those things because we didn't have the level of technology, we didn't have as much information. But now that young people are growing up, it's not uncommon for them to be having that same conversation or sharing that same video. And so they are speaking to a group of young people who will be growing up to go to college, having those exact same conversations.
Yeah. I mean, we know it's a different generation. I don't know if this is like regional, but Reverend Josh probably knows this because I don't see any children on here. I knew it was a different generation when I heard Beat King's song, Then Leave, and the young girl said, "Get that bread, get that head, then leave." I knew it was a whole different generation. Okay, like, because it's not,
Cardi and Meg said the new standard.
Yeah, absolutely. But these are young girls who are literally saying, not, have sex with this guy to keep him. Like, that's what they were trying to tell us when we were growing up. PBS said, if he love you, he'll wait. If he loved you, he gonna ask you to have sex with him. But now they're like not saying like, can I? And then I think when we're getting older, it was almost like sex was to keep him. You know what I mean? Like, if you can do this, this, and that, then you'll keep them, which not true. But now they're like, girl, get what you can, do a quick money grab, let him please you, and get out of there.
That's owning sexuality at an age before we even like would contemplating our sexuality, right? Like, I wasn't even exploring it at the age that they're owning it. Like, I wouldn't even. So, I mean, I think that's another testament to what Mark was saying about the exposure to information.
Yeah. Because I remember I had a girl in my class in 10th grade, and she couldn't wear red polish or red lipstick because her mama said she was fast if she did. Now, she was doing all kind of stuff. She should let her put that polish on. But, we were the bad kids because we were wearing nail polish. I mean, I was still a part of that generation. Like, she was a Kojic kid, and her mom's like,
could it be the things that we... Could it be the things that we used to do a roundabout the way, right? So Barbara talked about we had to go get the DVD from somebody's sister cousin to do that, and now, like,
I wasn't doing that. Just
I
Barbara said that's not going to be the only quote of the night.
Don't do that.
I didn't say how I was doing it. Anyway, but
that's right. That's right.
Right. The things that we used to do behind the scenes in covert and ways, they are so upfront with it, right? Like, I'm just going to do it. As a basketball coach, I know what it is to walk to the back of the bus and see pornography going on phones while we on the bus, right? So like they don't sneak it. They're just upfront with it.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, we also weren't, for those of y'all who have watched Grown, it's like I don't think we were on like X and Molly and like Out of Our Minds. Like that kind of, that's a different world. Like,
and I think that's the point where we talk about what a church's responsibility to young people, right? Like, we have to start having different conversations. Mm-hmm. So instead of, Dr. Bree, you mentioned like true love waits. Right. Yeah. Instead of the true love ways conversation, let's talk about healthy relationships, right? Mm-hmm. And what does that look like in a real way? Instead of, what was Barbara Bush? Was that her? Don't do drugs?
Because what was it? Dare? Was that
her? Yeah. I don't know who. I mean, but let's talk about what evidence-based harm reduction models look like in churches, right? Mm-hmm. Because you might have a kid come into your youth ministry. I know I have. Who just smoked right before entering.
I know. Let me tell you, these kids and weed,
like,
it's so normal to them.
Let's talk about that in the church.
Let me be old, Dr. Shack. It pissed me off that these kids think everybody smoke weed, so they come smelling like weed in a little squirt or something, over it. I'm like, now you smell like Calvin Klein and weed. Like, don't bring both of those smells in here. But it is so disrespectful, and they'll be like, "What'd you say?" I'm like, "Why are you high?" Who said I'm high? Huh? You said you're high. Like, I'm looking at you. That is one thing that I don't think I'll ever get over. The way that they think weed is so normal.
For me, it's not, and again, this might be my context. For me, it's not that you're smoking weed. It's why you're smoking weed, right?
That's nice. I want to know why you brought that smell in here to me.
Well, I mean, the smell is the smell, right? But it gives us an opportunity to have different conversations and employ different models of ministry in the space that we typically don't have these conversations. Yeah. I remember mentioning that example because I had a kid who used to come high all the time, and I was doing my own personal harm reduction model with this kid. And so I gave that example, and this other youth pastor got mad. She was like, "You can't allow a kid who's high in your Bible study because that's exposing the other kids in there too." And I'm like, "You don't think they already
exposed?
Are you kidding me?"
Right. And where do you want them to go? If they're smoking weed at this age and they are always high, you don't think they may need your help? You don't think they may need a new community? You don't think they may need
So what does that conversation look like? Is it don't smoke weed no more? No, that's not the conversation. The conversation is
showing where you start.
Let's talk about why you're smoking weed, and let's talk about how we reduce harm, right? Those are the secular models that are used in different spaces that I think the church could benefit from.
Mm-hmm. Or even decriminalizing the notion of drug usage. Like, they might be smoking weed because they got ADHD and they need to focus. And that is
and here's the problem though. They need to do it. We can't hear any, and when I use excuse, I mean reason, right? We can't hear any reason because we know it's so dangerous. You know what I mean? As long as it's illegal for them to participate in it, whatever reason they give is never going to be enough, because we're trying to stop you from getting pulled over, shot down, you know, and becoming a speed bump in the middle of the street because we're no longer hanging fruit. Like, so we can't, like, the reasons, like, oh, I understand ADD. Even if you get it, it's not okay. We can't let you expose yourself to that.
What happens when it's legalized?
Well, now I got kids, and I'm gonna tell you right now. Don't disrespect me like that. Keep it, you know. Don't take no walk at Thanksgiving. I don't play that. You know what I mean? Like none of it. But I think when it's legalized, the conversation changes.
Right.
You know,
and it's legal in a lot of, like, there are dispensaries all over DC.
And that's true. It's never gonna be legal here.
I think from the church angle, I just feel like we're unprepared. Like we don't take the time to think critically and theologically about some of these things until they're on top of us, right? So to the point about weed, you know, it used to be, well, you can't smoke weed, it's a sin. Well, why is it a sin? I think it's because the body is a temple, but definitely because it's illegal. Yeah. Well, if it's legal, you say I'm cool now, right, Rev? Well, you know, and I think that's sort of we run into these issues. So my admonishment, I don't know who's watching. My admonishment is to think through some of these things before they are on top of us, and utilize the opportunities that I think that Gen Z gives us to enter into these conversations, sort of as conversation partners as we develop our own theologies around it. Willow Smith is talking about polyamory on Red Table Talk. She's Gen Z, and she ain't the only one that's done thought through. She's not the only one that's thought through polyamory.
Yeah.
That and she's an authority on it. The way that she presents her reasoning and her argument,
she presents like an authority on everything. Like, wow,
that's that Gen Z thing. And so I think that, and so instead of waiting the 5 years until it might not even be 5, until it comes up later, let's have these conversations. Let's think through these things as Gen Z is presenting them to us, so that we are working out our theology, and so that, because what I do know is that stuff ain't going away. Like we are only moving faster towards wherever the hell we're going. Right. And so we don't have time, I think, to wait anymore. I tell every person that gets a call to a church like this, that's the difference. I think millennials and Gen Z and Gen Z is we don't have the space anymore to come up with what our theology is going to be over time. Like you have to have wrestled with this thing because you may get asked on day one where it is you stand on this, and this interview, and the local paper, and the kids, and the parents. So, all right, I'm done with that.
And I think the truth is that Gen Z also isn't waiting on us to figure it out, because they're finding community, and they're finding spaces that affirm the lifestyle. So we talked about Gen Z being like their own authority. And I think for many of them, like, you know, for us, this information overload has caused them to come to to understand certain things that it took us to get to college in order to deconstruct. You know, we had that enlightening period that we had in college. Like, wow, that's not really how the world works. They're having that at a much younger age. And so they're not waiting to figure it out, because for many of them, they believe at a certain age, at 12, 13, that they've reached a level and a point where they can identify themselves. And so I think for the church, one of the biggest things we need to understand is that people are finding community. And so, like, this idea of like, hey, we have community is getting old. Like, that's an old model. That's an old model. We need more than just community, because people are finding that level of community, and they're finding it even in a level of like a spiritual sense, because there's more than just a political investment in this. These are people who now feel seen. And those are the things that's the language the church used to use. We see you, we affirm you, you know, and now people are saying, I see that in a different setting.
Yeah. Yeah, see. We had a question, and Vivian sent it to me to make sure we did not ignore it. I want Shaq to talk about it last because of your context, and you probably have a really great understanding of this. They talked about how to minister to LGBTQIA plus youth, and so usually when I get that question, I'm like, just like everybody else, right? Not to single them out, but so let me take it a step further. How do you minister to them when their needs are specific to their sexuality? Like when they're saying, I don't know if my mom's gonna let me stay there, or it's the elephant in the room and everybody knows, but if I actually say that, or if I live authentically, how I authentically feel, I don't know if I get to stay at my house, or I can identify one way, but I better not have no girlfriend. I better not have I can't go to prom. Like everybody knows it. They even let me identify. But so what about when the issues become specific to their sexuality and they're reaching out to you? How y'all handling this these days?
So I don't know. I'm not sure. I will speak from my experiences in this area, and I haven't been a youth pastor in since 2017. So I know things move fast, but my job for me was to create a safe space. I wanted to be the loving space, the affirming space, for whatever the young person was going through, questions that they had. But I also wanted to protect them at the same time and let them know that I am a safe space. But outside of Reverend Gill's office, it might be a different world.
Yeah, that's so true.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so here are some tools that you can use to help you navigate outside of Reverend Gill's office. Mm-hmm. Right. It always comes with my phone number. It always comes with professional help and all those type of things. But I think what they appreciated most was that regardless of what was taking place, even in my house with the person that gave birth to me, I knew that there was somebody who I respected that said that they loved me right where I am, as I am. And many times they're wrestling, right? And it gave me space to wrestle without telling me no before they even heard me out. Mm-hmm. Right? And again, I can go into details, but there's a whole lot of going above and beyond that Dr. Mitchell talked about, right? Like once you've built relationship and you've created that safe space, I've literally been the one to talk a kid off a bridge, right? So like it's those aspects of ministry. Ooh, I'm about to get emotional. That many people don't see and they don't get. They don't see you at night trying to catch the transgender kid who's run away from home because the boyfriend that came home with a bottle, right? And you got to drive through the streets in the middle of the night and find them. And your safe space is your car, right? So that they can live. And so, biblically, are we going to create colonies of leopards? I've heard a rapper say that one time. Josh in Pursuit. He said in his album back in 2010, I believe, that are we going to create colonies of leopards? And if we are going to create colonies of lepers, don't we realize that it was Jesus who went through the lepers when others shunned them? So I'm going to get crying.
Yeah. That's deep.
That's good.
Are we being, and y'all can answer, you can answer this, or you can answer, in the way that you've been thinking. Are we mediating yet between parents and LGBTQIA plus children? Are we having those conversations yet?
I have.
Yeah, my church.
Yeah.
We feel the questions.
I've had those conversations within the church, but here's another part of the reality of my context of ministry, right? So I work in a homeless youth shelter, and 40% of the population of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ.
I knew it.
About half of those young people are homeless because of religious reasons, right? So I've had youth who have been in the shelter that I've seen at other churches, where I went to preach their youth Sundays, or I may have gone and done workshops, and their kids are in the, you know, at the shelter. I have children of pastors who are living at the shelter, right? I've had this one kid who, and I say this in this context because I've already written about it. So there's no divulging of, you know, private information, but I had one kid who, and this is how I realize the number of church-connected youth I have in my space, because they might be walking down the hallway playing Hezekiah Walker. And I'm like, what you know about that? Like, what church you been in? Or we have kids who are musicians and playing shout music in the music studio, right? I'm like, what church you part of? But anyway, so I had this one young person whose parent was a pastor, a trans youth, parent was a pastor. The youth said that they felt called to ministry. His father told the young person that they could never be called to ministry because of their trans person. And so this young person was conflicted about that. I'm sitting in my office one day, and I share this to talk about the magnitude of the importance of having this conversation and for giving youth a livable theology, right, around sexual orientation and gender identity, right? So I'm in my office one day, and the young person comes in, and it's like, I need to talk to you. I was on the phone. I need to talk to you. So I'm like on the phone, like, you need the what? As soon as I looked at this young person, I immediately hung up the phone. This young person had a shirt wrapped around their wrist, fresh cuts, dripping blood in my office. And I said, talk to me about what's going on. And this young person said, I can't do this anymore. I said, can't do what anymore? And they said, the whole religion thing. The young person's father is a pastor of a church. And this kid is in my office dripping blood from their arm because they cannot reconcile this call that they feel that they have over their lives versus what somebody told them, who was supposed to be a representative of Christ, that they could not be, right? In that moment, I'm like, first of all, this must be what the women who stood at the foot of the cross felt when that blood was dripping down Jesus's body.
Oh my God.
Like this had to be what that felt like. And so when we talk about, are we having these conversations are a matter of life and death.
Right.
I don't care what you believe personally, right? We're talking about what is a livable theology. And if you can't say anything else to a young person, the scripture that you remember is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, spirit, and love your neighbor as you love yourself, right? Love is a livable theology. I don't care where you net out in terms of your personal beliefs, right? But that's what we need to be sharing with our young people, because it is, when I tell you it's about life and death, it is about life and death. And so all that other stuff, to me, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's good.
It's really good.
That's deep. Did you just shut us all down?
No, I mean, Dr. Gill was getting emotional. I'm like, I've seen some stuff. Like, I mean, having to go to the morgue and identify a kid's body kind of stuff. So I really like all those religious moralisms and all of that stuff that we trying to push, you know, that's not my agenda at all.
And I encourage us to, because I think, you know, sometimes when I get really shocked, it just reminds me that I have to go see a new group of people and spend time with a new group of people. Kind of how I live and operate as a researcher, but also as somebody who loves God and wants to always be able to preach to all people. And I've talked about this before, I think on Dr. Frank Thomas's Preachers show. And I say it again, like when things shock you too much, you know, sometimes we get so churched or so educated that we don't spend time around real people anymore. And when we do, it's only the real people who walk into our church, but we don't go to other people's context to understand them in their own spaces so that we can know an uninhibited, uncensored version of them. And so I encourage that we find people like Dr. Shack, so that we can be able to spend time and see what's happening in the world, that we go to people who are doing ministry like Reverend Barbara and Reverend Mark, so we can go and see the gamut, right? Not just one version. I remember I didn't take a youth pastor position. I wasn't even going to apply for it because it was full of Jack and Jill kids. And I was like, I don't feel like that. Because that's a new kind of work, right? Because they do have issues. They're very different. It ain't hood kids kind of work that we know. Like project kids or hungry kids or middle class kids. We're talking about like, I don't want to say the kind of experiences you have when it, but I'm talking about a real gamut. But so I hope, and I'm going to ask you guys to all tell us how we can follow you or reach out to you. But I hope you actually do it, even if it's saying, hey, do you know anybody in my area? Or do you know a shelter in my area? Or what does it look like to volunteer or spend time? Because these things are important, and everybody keeps quoting this, and I appreciate it. Love is a livable theology.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. Yep, that can be a good word for to close this out. So if each of y'all can come can tell us how to find you and just your final thoughts, I'd appreciate it. And I will, whoever goes last will be the last word. I don't want to stop it, so I'll do this right now. I want to thank Dr. Gill, Dr. Josh, Reverend Barbara, Reverend Mike, and Dr. Shack for spending time with us. I hope you appreciate the time that they've given us today. I hope that this allows you to explore in the way that we're talking about Generation Z does, to ask tons of questions, to be the authority on yourself and not somebody else, and be open to hearing who people are, to let go of your egos so that you can ask the important questions to do the ministry you need to do. And if you don't happen to be a person who works with you, I know you engage young people. And so whether it's your child, like me, I probably have to have some different conversations with my kids, whether it's your child or your grandchild or your niece or your nephew, whoever you come in contact with, remember, love is a livable theology, and needs change over time. We shouldn't make the assumption that we know people's needs, but we should always be open to meeting the needs or doing our best to meet the needs of the people we love. And who do you love? It should be everyone. Now, I have a hard time, loving racists and white supremacists. It's still my struggle. But I tell you, everybody else is game. So I want us to really explore what it means to actively love Generation Z. Okay, so we can start. I think we started with Dr. Gill the last time, so we can start with Dr. Shack this time. Tell us how to find you, how to reach you, what work you're doing, and your final thoughts.
I am on Instagram at Pastor Shack, Twitter at Pastor Shack, and then I think the same thing on Facebook. What else did you ask? So where can you find me?
What work you're doing and your final
work I'm doing. So my ministry is at the shelter. I'm also working on turning my thesis into a book. So y'all pray for a sister. And my final thoughts is really that children matter to God.
Pause. Someone asked a question. So a trans can preach in the pulpit? Really? I don't know what a trans means. But I'm gonna assume they mean a transgender person. Can they preach in the pulpit? So these are the questions that I've never
answered. If they've been called, absolutely. Nobody should be preaching without a call. But if they have been, absolutely, why not?
If you don't, the rocks will cry out. So if the rocks will talk, that's what the preachers say in the sermon.
Right.
And then the human can talk.
Yeah, I just think those kind of questions always throw me off, to say the least. Sorry, Pastor Jack. I wanted us to answer that because I didn't want to let that just kind of linger out there without
answer. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, my final thoughts: children matter to God. I think we forget that, and we often try to scam them out of their inheritance, but the kingdom belongs to them. So we need to remember that.
Joanne the scammer in the church.
The scammers.
Yeah. Reverend Mark.
Yeah, once again, Dr. Bree, thank you so much. And all the colleagues, y'all are awesome. Have it right there at Mark Laverne on pretty much all social media platforms. I think with my final thought, I really appreciate Dr. Shack with that love is a livable theology. And I think one thing is that we need to continue to push a theology that empowers young people to live out their lives. I feel like so often we are concerned of what's going to happen with the church. And I believe Jesus said the gates of hell is not going to prevail and the church is going to be okay. And in this kind of, I feel like so often in this day and age, we're overwhelmed with messages that almost remind me of like, we're moving from like Christian ministry and we're seeing a lot of like Christian industry, a lot of Jesus talk, a lot of mentioning of Jesus. And we're often reminded that a lot of that talk that's happening doesn't serve Black and brown people. It's not a theology that helps them in body and in spirit. And so I think it's important for us to continue to speak and to give young people, empower young people with the message, and allow the Spirit to let the church be the church and to do become what the church is going to be.
I appreciate that. Ministry versus industry. So true. So true. Dr. Josh.
Yes, thank you again for the opportunity to be a part of the conversation. For me, I think one of the things is that fellowship still matters. We talked about this earlier, but just in a hyper-connected society, what I found is my kids don't want to do any more Zoom, anything, no more virtual, nothing.
Yeah.
And so finding opportunities for them to be content creators, even if they don't consume what we think we're putting out for them, is okay. Finding them ways to fellowship one with another. And we talked a bit about that idea of putting them to work as creatives. When I was growing up, it was, we were told the Bible is instructions before leaving earth. And we wanted to give them the word first and then send them out. I think the model for Gen Z is to put them to work and help them understand the manual as they're working. And I think that's an effective way. And just that the difference for me with Gen Z and millennials is that it's truly life or death. I think Dr. Shack underscored that in a powerful way. But as I think through my time as a youth pastor, even now, I'm seeing some of my students graduate this year from my time. So many of them, we had to literally walk off a ledge. So many of them, we had to find, or as Dr. Gill said, there were nights riding around the city, literally keeping some of these kids alive. And I think that's different. I think what they're exposed to is different. I think their sense of worth is established in a different way. And so I think we have to be mindful of that. We have to check on the stars in our ministries. We have to check on the pastor's kid, the soloist's kid, the praise team kid. But this is truly life or death ministry. So take it seriously. Take seriously who we put before them. And we're going to be all right.
Yeah, I agree. Reverend Barbara.
Thank you again, Dr. Bree, for this opportunity. And I've been taking notes this whole time. I've had my pen, and I'm just so grateful for all the wisdom you all have been sharing. You can find me at Babs Flow. That's BABZFLO. That is my high school nickname, and I need to change that. But until then, you guys can follow me on Instagram, and I'm also on Facebook, Barbara Floorville. I think for me, what's really resonating from the information that I have found in relationship to what I've been learning in youth ministry is that our youth are attracted to authenticity. Something that really stood out to me in the research was that Gen Z are not as compelled to follow celebrities as they are, real life people who are sharing their authentic stories and their authentic selves. That's why YouTube is such a hot spot for people to go to for information, because they have real people giving real reviews on real things. So I think that is truly what the Spirit allows us to do when we allow the Spirit to do it, to allow ourselves to be authentic. And that will speak through generations beyond what we can even try to qualify for Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X. Across the board, our authenticity is what I believe connects us to the godliness inside of us, and that is what will save us and the Black church. So that's something I would share.
I appreciate it. Dr. Gill. Oh, before Dr. Gill goes, because he'll give us our final word and then bid us farewell. I want to thank you guys not only for being here by just my verbal thank you. I also want to tell you when we're releasing the information on the state of the Black church in this area specifically, it'd be my honor to make sure you guys all get the monograph, and then we get the opportunity to hold a focus group so you can ask specific questions about the state of the Black church in this area and in other areas, so that to the best of my ability, we can make sure we use the data to help your ministries to go forward. And I would love for that to be my way of saying thank you. Dr. Gill.
Thank you again, Dr. Bree, for the invitation. Thank you to all the other panelists. It has been a joy and a pleasure to learn from you. I hope that from this space we grow in relationship with one another. I do want to state that it was mentioned briefly, but my work is actually in the area of ministering to middle-class Black youth. What we know is that the higher you get in the economic stratosphere, the more overt and covert racism you will deal with. And that not only affects in adult life, but the children of those adults who go to all white spaces in their scholastic education. And so with that being said, I can be reached at EJ Gill 1906 on Twitter and Instagram, and Eric Gill on Facebook, with the help and the push of my dear and abiding friend, Dr. Mitchell, and Reverend Bree. Hopefully I'll put the work I've done into a book one day as well. So,
and if he doesn't, I'm going to two-piece him, so he'll get it done.
I got to stop having kids first. Amen, somebody.
I get it.
That's a different kind of work, Reverend.
Thank y'all so much. We're going to end the live. We appreciate y'all. Go ahead and share it. Put it in your groups, whatever you got to do so that people get to take advantage of this information. For the person who asked how to give, if you want to sow, I did put it in the comments, but I do this work so that to the best of my ability, especially when it's not something that costs in a certain way, I don't want you to give. You guys support me so much in the work that I do. You guys are extremely supportive in my subscription program, my webinars, and every PDF I put out. So every time I can do something free, I want to do something free. So please don't feel like I need that. This is what I want to do as my reasonable service to make sure you guys can hear from people who can help you do the work that you're called to do. Thank you so much and have a good night.